wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Simon Chadwick. I'm Professor of Eurasian Sport at EM-Lyon Business School in France. For those of you who are wondering what the photograph is behind me, that's Paris, just to create the ambience of being in France. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe, healthy, well, and that your families are good during these difficult times. As I was preparing for today's webinar, I've been in a class this morning, webinar. As I was preparing for this webinar, I was reflecting upon some of the things that I've been doing over the last 10 years. And a lot of what I've done over the last 10 years is to travel. And the reason that I've traveled is because of sport. And my travel has taken me to all kinds of places. So one of the places that I've very often been in over the last 10 years is Qatar. And as a result of that, I know Qatar much better than I did. But I also know a lot of those people in Qatar too. So the local Qatari population, but also the Indian population in Qatar. There's a significant Filipino population there, North African population. And so I understand these people better, and I know these people better. And I've got people from lots of different countries who I call friends. And this has all happened because of sport. And so I think it's highly relevant and indeed pertinent to today's webinar that has happened to me, because what we're going to do today is to focus upon, in very broad terms, how sport brings people together. And so for those of you who are online today, watching, listening, and maybe sending in questions, please, I hope you approach this webinar in a good spirit, in a constructive manner, with an open heart and an open mind, because what we're here to do is to talk about how sport brings people together. Now, obviously, some fairly significant things have happened in over the last 6 months, which means that sport and the power of sport to bring people together is perhaps even more important now than it was before. But if we go back to the old days, and you may remember the last decade, back in 2019, when we were all younger, we all had more hair, and the world seemed a completely different place. Even then, there were issues. We know that societies had issues with discrimination, with social cohesion. There were issues around ethnicity, nationality, gender, and so forth. And I know that in Qatar and elsewhere in the world, sport was being utilized as a means through which to bring people together. But we're in a new era. We're in a very different environment, even to December 2019. And so we've got an environment in which people are wearing masks. We have an environment in which people have been locked away in their houses for a long time. We're in an environment where social media can sometimes have proved to be divisive. And so hopefully such issues, such challenges, such problems, such important opportunities will hopefully be discussed today. Now, we're incredibly fortunate that we have speakers with us. We have Fadi, Sharona, Paul. We're hoping to get Eglantina online with us. But what I would like to do is I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves in a moment. Before I do that, can I just say to you, we're going to try and run for 60 minutes. Paul has challenged me because he's a football guy, and he's got his timing board out, and he's saying, "Time, finish, Simon, finish." I'm a hopeless timekeeper, so I'm going to try and go for 60 minutes. We might go a little more than that. But during that 60 minutes, Fadi, Sharona, Paul will share with us their views. I'll be asking them some questions. But we do welcome and we do value your questions. And what I'm going to be trying to do is to monitor the Q&A or the chat bars to see what people are asking. What I would recommend is that you actually post in the chat forum so we can see your questions. I'll try and get around to asking as many of them as possible, but that may not be possible. in which case I apologize to you in advance. Okay, so I can monologue forever, but I'm not going to. What I would like to do is to start by going to Fadi and just saying, Fadi, tell us who you are, tell us where you are, and tell us what is it that you do.
Thanks, Simon, for the introduction and for coordinating this webinar. So I'm Fadi Makki. I currently lead the first behavioral insights unit, the nudge unit of Qatar, which is called B for Development, established by the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy to become the vanguard for pushing evidence-based policy making, and then make sure we use behavioral science to promote programs such as Generation Amazing, test what works, and then promote evidence-based policymaking. I'm also founder of Nudge Lebanon. I have more than 23 years of experience in the public sector. I was undersecretary in Lebanon for economy and trade, where I led, among other things, World Trade Organization and economic development and socioeconomic reforms. I basically also worked with Prime Minister of Lebanon on a lot of economic issues. And finally, 4 years ago, I joined the team of Hassan Tawadi, the Secretary General of the World Cup, to set up this beautiful initiative, initially called the Qatar Behavioral Insights Unit. And 2 years later, after really proving concept, if you want, we formally established it as a foundation, one of the sister legacy programs of the Supreme Committee called B for Development. And we work very well with Generation Amazing on their beautiful programs for football for development. Looking forward to a great session.
Okay, thank you, Fadi. Thank you for introducing yourself. Just to say, Eglantina, I'm not going to come to you just yet, but I just want to say hi. We've managed to get you online. Apologies about the slight technical issues. To people who are watching, it's really great that we've got Eglantina here. I think it adds a really important perspective on what we're discussing. Sharona, over to you. Who are you? Where are you? What do you do?
I ask myself those questions all the time. My name is Sharona. Much like you, I'm quite a well-traveled woman. I'm now at 107 countries in the world, and I think that gives me a pretty cool perspective on some of the topics we're going to discuss today. A lot of that travel's also been about sport. We're all a bit sports mad. I imagine I quite like following Formula One around the world. In particular, they go to some pretty cool locations. My current role is president of the Global Institute of Sport, that is UCFB's Institute of Sport, UCFB being the University Campus of Football Business. Also really fantastic partnership with Generation Amazing. My background's probably more in the education sector historically. I've worked at some really great universities around the world, in Europe and Asia, in the United States. My accent is Canadian, but I've lived in quite a few different countries, so it might be a bit muddled at this point. But about 6 years ago, I joined UCFB. We're based out of some really cool stadiums around the world. I'm usually headquartered at Wembley Stadium here in London, but we also operate out of Etihad Stadium in Manchester. We've got some amazing global study hubs around the world, New York in Red Bull Arena, in Atlanta and Mercedes-Benz Stadium, in the MCG in Australia, and very proudly in my hometown of Toronto out of BMO Field. And we've also got some fantastic networking centers for students and staff and partners in Mumbai, Dubai, Shanghai, and Singapore. So that's me, and I'm very excited to be joining this panel today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sharona. Paul, over to you. Same questions.
Yeah, that's a tough one to follow. I'm an English guy working for an Italian football club, AS Roma, living in the United States. So where our ownership headquarters are. To sort of give you a background of how I sort of ended up here. I was a journalist as a teenager. I was actually a music journalist working in the world of hip hop. So I think, you know, being a white guy in a largely black music sphere. I think that shaped a lot of my worldview. I learned a lot from music, probably maybe more so than I did from school. And from that, I worked at different magazines and internet sites. I ended up at Liverpool Football Club, where I worked for about 14 years. And the final 3 years of that time was spent on international development and leading the sort of the growth of the club around the world. And that sort of allowed me to travel. I spent a lot of time in Asia, a lot of time in Africa, a lot of time in the Middle East. And I think when I moved to Roma, I think I brought a lot of that worldview and being so well traveled, meeting so many different people, working on so many good programs. And now in my role at Roma, I'm Chief Strategy Officer. So I'm sort of responsible for media, communications, and I work a lot on lots of stuff that's around the sort of topic we're talking about today, things like social inclusion, social issues, and that sort of thing. So it's quite although it's a football role, I think, we're dealing with fans and we're dealing with people around the world, and we've partnered with Generation Amazing last year. So I spent a fair amount of time in Qatar, and it's a really interesting role.
Thank you, Paul. And Eglantina, are you in the Palace of Versailles, or that's a very impressive backdrop you have there. You need to unmute yourself, Eglantina. Welcome.
See, Professor, I glammed up. I brought the Versailles down to Miami.
This puts I'm obviously just down the road from you. If you're in Versailles, I'm just down the road from you.
I can see you, but this is in Miami, Versailles, a little Cuba down here. But we have pretty good coffee, and I think it's a perfect set for soccer, for football,
Absolutely.
for some football.
Absolutely.
For inspiring the youth in the morning, very early here.
So same questions to you, Eglantina. Who are you? Where are you? What do you do?
Well, so first of all, thank you for having me here, and I'm really, really happy to share this conversation with all of you and your incredible work that you all do. I am a Venezuelan woman who grew up in the middle of the Venezuelan Amazon jungle, and that's where my passion for soccer started, when the natives around me, that they were the only other people close by to my father's little exploring how to raise a family in nature, deep down in nature. I had a soccer ball, and that was the only thing that connected us through a universal language. And then years passed by. I was a fan of soccer, just watching soccer games, and I took a career in journalism and modeling and television. I became a host for MTV, which I was there 10 years working with all the rock stars around the world, hosting a daily show and all the awards, and how the importance of another universal language as music can shape people's behaviors, motivate people, inspire people, call to action, and ultimately educate. About 10 years ago, having a political, social divisions basically in Latin America, but mostly in my own country of Venezuela, I wanted to be a part of the solution, and I started to develop a social program, using soccer as a tool for fostering, noble personalities and giving kids the opportunity to succeed, overcoming their obstacles, no matter where they're coming from. So we started this project in Haiti. It was in the middle of the earthquake when we first arrived, and funny enough, people were bringing medicine and water, which was very needed, but something that brought the community together in such a time of despair and uncertainty was soccer. Still, until today, it's been 7 years. Carrefour got the program, and it's happening in 5 different parts of Haiti. We're happy to say there are more than 2,500 kids that participate every year. We established a program with the United Nations of creating a global tournament to support the SDGs of the 17 goals. And it's in partnership with the United Nations Global Goals World Cup. I don't know if you've heard about it, but they're originally from Denmark, and we have a celebration in New York during the General Assembly every year, which every country brings a women's team and pledges for one of the goals of the SDGs. And it's quite a fun time to create awareness, to bring people together, and using the magic of soccer. So from Haiti, went down to Venezuela, to Mexico, and it ended up in we have about 7 clubs around Latin America and the US. I was based in New York, and now in these moments of COVID, I had to come to Miami with my Versailles walls and my soccer ball. So I'm just happy to be here and share how the magic of soccer can transform and bring us together in challenging times.
Yeah, thank you, Eglantina. And I think for anybody who's online, this is sport and social inclusion. We have a Lebanese man in Doha, in Qatar. We have a Canadian woman in England, an English guy in Boston, a Venezuelan woman in Miami, and you have me, an English guy, supposedly in Paris. My office is in Paris, but I'm not in Paris at the moment. Don't tell anyone. But this really is what sport and social inclusion is all about. So if I could move across now to the first question, and I'm going to address this to each of our speakers in turn, and that is, I'm going to ask what contribution sport generally and football specifically can make to social inclusion. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this term social inclusion, I think in general terms, we're talking around issues of discrimination, of ethnicity, of race, of gender, possibly of nationality, heritage as well. So if I could come to you first, Sharona, what role do you think sport and football can play in these areas?
Thanks, Simon. First of all, everyone's experience is so fantastic, and both Paul and Eglantina mentioned music as well, and I think it's those industries of television broadcasting, music, sport, all of these really public, easily accessible entertainment industries, frankly, where you have so much power, to change the world. And it's what drove me to this industry in the first place. When you think about even something as simple as, one football club like Real Madrid alone, they've got something like 250 million followers on social media. If that's not powerful, start multiplying it by all the different football clubs, all the different sports. You've just got an amazing platform in this industry to show what the world looks like. So when you think about what people see, that influences who they are. It influences their education. Education definitely continues when you leave school or university. And I think, by being leaders in this industry, all of us are participating in it. We actually have a responsibility to make sure that what people see on these very public platforms reflects reality and doesn't just reflect any one demographic. And so, I think things like, World Cups, very topically, since we're all here with Generation Amazing, is one of those very powerful opportunities to showcase how many different types of humans there are on Earth and how amazing we all are, and how, together we can do fantastic things.
Could I just ask you, Sharona, just in a sentence,
yes,
what is it about sport particularly? And because you mentioned music there, and we can also think about movies, or we can think about TV, but what is it about sport in a sentence, do you think?
Particularly football. I think, one, it's the global game, and it's the great equalizer. You just need a ball. And
everyone understands it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think Eglantina basically summed it up in her intro. We can all go home, but it is something we can all participate in some form or other. And you're right. Without any verbal communication, you can see how similar all people really are.
And it's really interesting. As an English guy, when I go to China, trying to explain cricket to the Chinese is very difficult, but trying to explain football to the Chinese, well, you don't need to explain football to the Chinese. So it is understandable. You need a ball, you need a goal, and that's it.
Except the offside rule, that's a bit more tricky. And trying to explain cricket to a Canadian, that took some time as well. So
okay, so before you ask me to explain it, moving across to Fadi, so I don't have to explain it. Fadi, in your role, and I find your role particularly interesting because I've got an interest in behavioral economics and nudging. So from your position, from your stance, what contribution can or does sport and football make to social inclusion?
To start with, I agree with kind of a lot with what Sharona and others have mentioned about the power of sport, the magic of sport. For us, I mean, from a behavioral science perspective, it provides really a shared experience. It provides a platform to test a lot of what works and what does not work. So what we do in behavioral science is take programs, initiatives, projects, dissect them to look at the barriers, to look at what we're trying to achieve, look at target behavior, and just approach them from kind of a biased perspective, look at those things that make someone fail kind of for no fault of their own. I mean, not because of good intentions, simply because we have bounded rationality. We don't always do what we're supposed to do. So these opportunities in football provide us with a platform to dissect the challenges, look at them, and then design solutions that are derived from insights from behavioral science to put them to test, to experiment what works. So really, it's not about taking what we think works, but applying scientific methods to test kind of scientifically what works, to measure social impact, inclusion, and others. So I see that these opportunities like sports provide this kind of opportunity for people to rehumanize opposing groups, especially if you take it to conflict zone, where you bring football and then not only you should watch, but what you can do is use this opportunity to design experiments, to test new theories in inclusion and social cohesion, and test what works in a piloted way initially, but then you could scale it up. While we know that context matter, but at least starting from what has worked elsewhere in conflict zones and others allows you to build on it. And then that shared experience could help you kind of scale up in a scientific fashion.
Now, Fadi, you used the word theory there, and as an academic, that immediately caught my attention. So can you give me a theory of inclusion? What does a theory of inclusion mean?
So basically, what we know from experiments that we could use small insights from this field of behavioral science, this great field that brings together sociology, psychology, neuroscience, economics, and really understand why people don't act the way they do. So basically, I mean, I bring in one beautiful experiment that was done in the conflict zone in Iraq, where simply playing football in a team mixed between Arab, Muslims, and Christian Iraqis, that allowed basically 26% percentage points more likeliness to attend a Ramadan dinner by the Christian, or 45 percentage points more likeliness to train with Muslims and to want to play again football. So doing this, you're testing new kind of theories, putting them in practice, and then measuring what works. More importantly, what works is not what you and I think works. There is a lot of beautiful anecdotal evidence that football is working. But what we want to do is push the envelope a little bit further by scientifically telling what is working and building little by little. And that's what Generation Amazing is doing, taking football for beautiful development objective, for social impact. But what we're doing with them as BFIT development is bringing the behavioral science tools and methods. One is a dissection from behavioral lens, the other one is experimentation, because then this all shared experience allow us to use what worked in one context and try to test it in another and build on it, and bring in the context inside it.
Thank you, Fadi. If I could come to you, Paul, and just to say, Paul, there's no reason why I should be looking at AS Roma at all, because my team affiliations are elsewhere. But some of the things that AS Roma has been doing, particularly on social media in recent years, means that I routinely pay attention to AS Roma. So you've been very effective in that sense. So again, same question to you is what role do you see as sport and football making to social inclusion? And I guess to kind of just to broaden it out a little to social causes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the topics we're talking about, I just sort of noted them down then. I think, discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia, these are not sport issues to me. These are societal issues. And sport, to me, and what we're talking about today, and football in particular, plays a critical role and has taken it upon itself to really lead the push for change, I think. And that's the power of football and the power of sport, because as everyone said so far, it is something that unites people, it inspires people, people look to heroes, it brings people together. But I don't generally see the same push, to change the world for the better in places like, in TV, in also not so much in music, and I'm the biggest music fan there is, but I think football is looked upon in particular, and football players are looked upon, and football clubs, to really push, an agenda for change. And I think it's been effective. But racism, there is no such thing really as racism in football. I think there's racism in society, and that seeps over. It's not like someone would be a racist in a stadium and then walk out and they wouldn't be a racist. They walked into the stadium in a racist way. But I'm really proud of how football in particular is stepping up. And look at the changes we've seen, on the back of shirts in the Premier League, since the restart, they've had Black Lives Matter. Roma's wearing a Black Lives Matter patch on the sleeve for all of our games in Serie A at the moment. These things were, I would say, pretty inconceivable, even a couple of years ago. So, footballers, because of their sort of status, because of, their celebrity, because of how many followers and the platforms we have, are looked upon, to stand up, to speak out. And that's something we've tried to do a lot at Roma. And our position really, and I'll talk about racism because I think that's one of the, not the only, but it's one of the main talking points right now around the world. Our position has been, it's not enough to not be racist. We have to be anti-racist, because I think, just not being racist just maintains a status quo and doesn't challenge anything. And I think the clubs who have spoken out, the clubs who have really pushed an agenda in Italy, I would say that, Roma and AC Milan have been really at the forefront of this. But elsewhere in the world, other clubs have picked it up as well. But, I'm always, I'm very critical of teams who say nothing, because it's easy to say nothing. On Pride Day, if you don't post, if you avoid doing some stuff because there will be a negative reaction, and there generally is a negative reaction when you take a strong stance, I just think you have to be brave. And I think you have to set out your stall and what you stand for. And I think people come along with you, and the world sort of changes, and maybe sometimes it's slower than we would want, but we see a change, and when we see a change right now in what's going on in football in particular. But these opinions and speaking out, being anti-racist, being anti-homophobic, these were not particularly popular opinions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Eglantina, really, that was an amazing introduction, and knowing your background is really a very distinctive upbringing that you've had, and obviously you're engaged now in some really amazing work. So again, from your perspective, how do you see this? What contribution does sport and football make? And I guess for those perhaps who are not familiar with your work, what particular aspects of social inclusion are important to you in what you do?
Well, what I think it's that magical component that soccer has, and I agree with Paul absolutely that racism and sexism and all this are not issues of sports issues, our society, our issues of a society. But what I think it's very attractive in sports is that gives you the opportunity of having an identity, of forming a personality. And as a young kid, and in the work that we do in our field as a grassroots social program, as a 501c3 non-for-profit organization, what we look for is to develop in these young kids with the magic of the sports itself is their own identity, their own personality. And what it's super fantastic, I think, or exciting about soccer is that it gives anybody the opportunity to succeed and to become that champion and to be rewarded as a god, as it happens in Latin America. You know, soccer, it's more than just a sports, it's a religion. It's something that every kid looks forward because it's the opportunity of the underdog to become something in life. And when you form these young kids with an identity, with their personality, knowing that they have a belonging in this world, even if they become, you know, the best soccer players in the world, or they become the best of what they can give in whatever sector or industry, just because of the tools that were instilled in their personality while growing up, which is self-discipline, resilience, common goals, teamwork. And in that teamwork, and we see it as an example in, you know, in the World Cups, you see our teams are formed with complete diversity, or most of them. You know, you have the French team, and they're all from other parts of the world, other skin colors. I'm sure they all have the different stands, either political, religious, or even, you know, it's in sexuality, but they all come together as a team with a common goal. And that, I think, it's the biggest lesson that we can learn as humanity, to have common goals and be able to achieve them with our individual principles, but something that is bigger than ourselves. We have a common purpose. And I think that's what is great about soccer. And it's attractive because when you hear the story of the underdog succeeding, it becomes, it's heartwarming for all of us, and it gives inspiration and it gives a possibility to the youth. And that's what we're doing here. No, it's a youth inspiring webinar. And I think it's still a lot of ways to improve. It's that, for instance, you know, FIFA has more members than even the United Nations. So there you go. And there are countries that are giving an identity that are not accepted in an institution like the United Nations, and by soccer gives them that stand, that individuality that it can have. So it's in the big fundamental spectrum or reality of things, it's an amazing tool to establish dialogue, to create identity, to form that respect and that common collective respect that we all need as a society to progress and develop and relieve all these issues that divides us, like racism and other kinds of discriminations. But as particularly in our organization in Goleadoras, what we use soccer is, even though it's the most popular sport in the world, women and girls are completely, in many places of the world, are not allowed to even go watch a game. You were talking about Iran and the way that, you know, Iran uses soccer in many ways. I'm not quite sure if I heard the specific information, but in Iran, there's been many cases recently. Last year, there was a woman that had to dress herself up as a man to go watch a game, and then she was tortured, arrested, and ended up in a very sad story. So we use soccer to also break that glass ceiling of, if we talk about divisions and racism, we also need to talk about the inclusion of both genders of our human race to be able to participate, and those equal opportunities also come with an equal amount of responsibilities. And it is a great opportunity to have that, to be able to achieve that dream of having a society that can coexist with principles and values that we can all share. And I think that's what soccer is able to give us, the opportunity to instill those values, to be able to set those rules. And as any player goes into a field, they respect those rules. And that's where the concept of peace really starts for me. And what I love of working with Qatar, and my first time in Doha and with Generation Amazing, was that last year we were awarded at the Qatar, the Women's Sports Committee, with a recognition for our outstanding work of bringing this sensitive topic of including women in the participation of such a male-dominated sport, but it's the most beautiful sport in the world. And it would start with these young girls being able to know that they can also kick a ball, they can also participate and be part of the team, and that will give them the mindset that they know that they can achieve anything in their lives with respect, with hard work, with confidence, and that they're not alone. So I think that's what it blows my mind of the beauty of this sport, and that's our work, and that's what we do. So and I think, you know, some professional teams are amazing, and they're doing great work, and every day working a little harder to include more women soccer, you know, the women's division, and giving them more outlets in the media, and giving them more sponsorship, and, you know, paying equal pays and other kind of subjects that that we can touch eventually. But I think that's my answer, I guess.
We sense your passion, Eglantina. We sense your passion, and we also share your views about the beauty of the game and the power of it as well. Just at that point, just to take a step back for a moment, just to remind people who are watching the webinar today, you can ask questions, and there is one question in the Q&A and chat bars. Particularly Sharona, you may want to read those, and if you want to respond to them, please feel free to do so. But I think to the person who's asked that question about education in North Africa, can I say, as a North European, this is something I'm acutely aware of every day, because I think certainly from the perspective of sport management education, we're incredibly well served in North Europe, and we're incredibly well served in North America, but perhaps the story isn't the same elsewhere in the world. And so there is something interesting there about how we share opportunity and we include everybody in the education and development associated with football. So do ask questions. I'm going to move on to the next one, Sharona, and really ask people, what kind of insights are you getting around social inclusion? So when you're involved in projects related to social inclusion, or when you're thinking and talking about social inclusion, what kinds of things are you talking about, and what responses are your organizations making to those issues and challenges that you're seeing? Sharona.
Yeah, it's a great question. This has been something that UCFB has been very passionate about. And we've got some incredible partners and have had for a long time. You know, Kick It Out, of course, we've all heard of them. They're the Inclusion, Diversity and Equality group for the FA and the Premier League. We're very good friends, UCFB and Kick It Out. We're also working very closely, speaking of Africa, with Africa 10, who's the late Kofi Annan's football foundation, to try to help with football development in Africa. And jointly, we actually did a Black Lives Matter webinar recently. I'm often speaking about women in sport, and echo a lot of the things that Eglantina said. It's been a real, even for me personally, it's been a real education lately. And I appreciate that as someone who's so passionate about education. I think in the fields of women's equality, I've been living and breathing that life, you know. Stuff that starts as simply as, you know, women dropping out of sport at a very young age because we need to do our hair and makeup and we don't want to look sweaty after recess, and, you know, just the impression of us needing to throw on heels and get our hair done. You know, it's imagery that's been ingrained in our minds, and I think I feel like I lived that life and knew a lot about that. And I have to say, I've been really inspired by women's football, the new teams. The Women's World Cup was unbelievable. I went down to Nice to cheer on Australia, which is one of the teams I support. And although they lost against Norway in the match I went to, the atmosphere was electric. You know, over 1 billion viewers watched that Women's World Cup. And I think that's in big part down to the education and the talking and the conversing that's been ramping up over the last few years. And all these discussions, you know, one of our academic staff sent me this incredible model that I think about all the time, and I believe he's made a comment already on this chat group, but about, you know, you start with fear because we're all different, and sometimes that's scary because you don't really understand and you have to learn to navigate that, you know, and then you learn and then you grow. And so, you know, I think football's made a lot of strides in the talking about and the learning from and the understanding that women are a market too, and growing. But there's a lot of other people out there who maybe we still need to enter those processes, and Black Lives Matter being a really good example for me personally. To be honest, I've learned so much, and I've heard things and learned from talking about it that I didn't know. I think social media has brought a lot of these issues to the forefront. A lot of it's been very uncomfortable conversations that I've had. You know, a lot of people think that they, you know, are really aware, but then when you get to the heart of the matter, there's nuance you don't know, or people have views you don't want to hear. And I think we have a real benefit to keep, you know, open minds, see what's out there on social media. Everybody has a voice now. And it's important to keep your eyes and ears open and listen to everything, and educate yourself about, you know, I guess what everyone's viewpoint is, and then collaborate for change. So I really hope that what we've seen in terms of women's football, which I agree has a long way to go, but it's been fantastic. And you've got 2 female presidents in the football space on this webinar alone. That's probably a percentage of them. But there's there's other groups out there. You know, I'm Jewish. You know, I've got a bunch of minorities that I can throw at you. But I think, you know, the more we talk and learn and collaborate and see the world and do things like World Cups, and the more we'll understand each other, and hopefully change will follow.
What I found particularly interesting about what you've said, Sharona, is it kind of resonates with what Paul said. Is the need to listen and to talk and to understand. You know, I could quite easily have said several years ago, I'm not sexist. And then I became a trustee of Women in Sport in Britain. So I sat on the board of Women in Sport. And when I sat and listened to the women around me talking about some of the issues in sport that confront them on a daily basis, I just thought, wow, I just didn't know this. I just didn't know this. And that really accentuates the importance of education and of being involved and having an open mind. And so I think hopefully as people go away from today, you know, we encourage you to be open. We encourage you to explore. We encourage you to think and to learn and to talk. And hopefully that will be one of the outcomes from today. So if I could go across to you, Fadi, next again, and again, ask the same question is in the work that you're doing, what are you seeing? What issues of inclusion are you seeing? And you've talked a lot about Generation Amazing, obviously. What contribution is Generation Amazing making to these issues of inclusion that you can see?
So we've seen evidence from a lot of field experiments that passing on values, social inclusion related messages, goes further when you're doing it through a sports session. So what they have, I mean, which is one of the most amazing offering, is really, rather than teach sports as physical education in classes, you teach it with a spin, which is inclusion. So pass on messages relating to teamwork, to problem solving, a lot of the values that we want to push, and we create normally separate classes for. What you're trying to do in Generation Amazing is bring this physical sports football aspect with some values, with the inclusion, with green, with health. So passing on those messages goes much further. And what we've seen is that playing, doing a program, which is typically around 10 to 12 sessions of Generation Amazing, and what you measure, there's so much you can measure. Either how much oneness people feel vis-a-vis their own kind of colleagues that have played the same kind of program, oneness vis-a-vis the teachers, the coaches, oneness vis-a-vis the school. And we've even tried recently to test impact of playing this Generation Amazing program, doing it for 12 weeks and seeing the impact on workers, those who are kind of working hard to build stadiums and other Supreme Committee related projects. So we've seen beautiful kind of impact by simply playing in this game and passing on those messages. We've seen kind of more willingness to kind of develop those kind of concept of oneness, feeling closer proximity with those people. So Generation Race has been very good in pushing that. But more importantly, it's, and I'm sure there are so many beautiful programs around the world, but what this particularly does is add this behavioral science perspective, that is experimentation. And this is very important. And I want to bring it back again, because when you test what works, you are able to kind of package it and then maybe export it and then bring more of this to other programs and contexts. So feeling oneness is very important. Feeling this kind of pride in role models is also very important. Discipline, following kind of guidelines, honesty. We've seen quite a bit of that. Even we've seen in some of those programs, evidence showing that people get a little bit more analytical by thinking more about inclusion and related things. And just one point that I've seen in many experiments also is that basically the football, particularly when you have women involved in leadership role as coaches and others, does promote this positive educational climate and probably decreases either dropout among females, but also create this excitement to continue. And then kind of, especially if you want to promote more football, particularly in Arab countries for women, which is starting to happen. So creating those role models, the messages, is extremely important. And doing it through sports has been very impactful, especially when you measure if it works and by how much it works. And even if it fails, because then you would know what works and what does not work.
Thank you, Fadi. Paul, social inclusion from your side of the Atlantic. What are you seeing? What are you seeing from the United States? What are you seeing in Italy? And how are you responding?
You know, it's incredible. It really is incredible. I've seen projects that Roma's done. Roma set up Roma Cares in 2014, and one of the most popular programs that we run is a school of fans. And basically, we send a player, and that might be a female player, might be a male player, into primary schools and secondary schools, and we sort of teach values based on respect, based on football. But again, like Fadi said, you know, if you've got a teacher just explaining things in a classroom, it's not always as impactful for this audience that we're trying to actually change their minds and change the way they think. But by using football, because football is it's a team game, you know, so there's no team that ever wins where there's only one player who does everything. So you do need to combine. You will have a team made up of people that, you know, will come from all sorts of different walks of life, particularly in football. We see it, you know, whether people can come from Africa, from Asia, from South America, from North America, from Europe. So you have this mix, and you also have different opinions. You know, so you know, you might have two players who come from countries that have technically been at war. You know, we've had players, you know, from parts of Eastern Europe who their countries are technically have been at war, and they are hugging and celebrating each other and creating goals for each other. You know, and this is the beauty, obviously, of football, that it does transcend for 90 minutes. You know, it has the power to transcend any other issues in the world. You know, and you've got two teams playing. You know, and we try and take all of the really genuine lessons from how football works and try and use them to reach people, because, you know, I'm very conscious that on this panel, you know, all of us are well-traveled. You know, all of us, I appear, you know, seem to have had good educations, and we've been privileged to have this. So I'm not necessarily negative about people who may harbour, you know, worries or views that were potentially not as enlightened as potentially we are on this panel, I think it's our goal to use our platform and the power we have and the players we have to go and reach those people. I'll give you an example, a very quick example. My daughter grew up in Liverpool. She lives in America now. America's pretty segregated, I would say. And her sort of mindset changed a bit from moving from the UK, which I felt was much more integrated and mixed than I see in the US. And she was lucky enough to be able to go to Qatar last December for the Generation Amazing Festival of Football. And she was nervous about going. She'd traveled, I think she traveled pretty well, but she'd never been to the Middle East. And she was nervous about going to Qatar, not because of the kind of stuff she hears in the media, because of what she sees, because of all people talking about terrorism, all these things. And she went over there, and within one day, and it was brilliant because it was a mixture of girls and boys, and everyone was from all over the world. No one knew each other. And she said to me after a couple of days, she said, "We're just exactly the same. We are exactly the same." She goes, "After we finished the football, I'm sitting with a girl from Lebanon, a girl from Palestine, and a guy from Qatar, and someone from India, and we're all on TikTok." And like, once you strip away, their backgrounds and everything else, they've got much more in common than we would ever think. Football was what brought them together. But really, just decide we have the same fears, the same worries, we have all of the same issues, and all of the same interests. And to me, that's an amazing thing the Generation Amazing did. Now, we can't reach everyone personally. Not everyone can travel to a place. We can't go into every single school, and we go into a school pretty much every week. So we have to use other tools, and that's where I think things like social media come into play. And I'll just end on this. We have to be authentic with what we do, because it's all well and good saying, let's stop sexual discrimination, and we're all for gender equality. But then we need to demonstrate it. And I'll give you an example. Yesterday, Roma launched their new kit, and the players featured were a mix of our men and women's team, because we can't just say it's, on any given day, we're all about gender equality, and then not demonstrating that in what else we do. So when we do a big interview with one of our male players from the first team, we have to give equal placement to female players. Why should we only ever feature our men's players on our social media and that sort of stuff? So I think brands, it's very easy to jump on a bandwagon, and I don't want to criticize anyone who posted a black square on Instagram, but it's not enough. It's okay to do it if that's what you choose to do, but you have to do more because people expect more. And I think, if we can't reach people in person, and that's absolutely the goal to try and do, then how else can we reach them? And we have to use both methods.
Thank you, Paul. Eglantina, from your stance, what are the issues that you're seeing? What are the inclusion issues that you're seeing, and how are you trying to tackle them?
Well, the main issue the opportunity that we see is that we can double the efforts by including young girls and women into the equation of such a popular sport in the world, about one of the biggest and greatest industries, and especially in the US with women's soccer growing every day, and new teams of women's professional teams being launched. And yesterday we saw how LA got their first women's national team, that it's owned by Serena Williams, Natalie Portman, and a bunch of other celebrities that are working really hard in shedding the light in, I will not use the word issue, I rather use the word opportunity, because it's about doubling the efforts of making a society unified, diversified, respectful, where boys, girls, no matter where their zip code, their skin color, their sexual preferences, or their religious beliefs, will be able to have opportunities for them if they want to and work hard to reach them and to become the better selves of the best versions of themselves. And I think that's what Fadi was saying as well, that it's not just about educating, which in the case of Paul, it's amazing that you took your daughter. I had also my own questionings when I first went to Doha, and in Generation Amazing, and going to a beautiful place like Qatar, where I see that women are super incorporated, and there's a respect, and there's a common interest of making a small country into the best version of what a country can be, in every issue, in education, in arts, in music, in sports. So I was just completely inspired and motivated. And I think that, you know, having that opportunity as a father to give your daughter that expansion of her heart and mind opening, I think nowadays the youth also has the great tools of social media and other platforms that you can communicate and see how diversity makes us greater, and how working together, which is with a common goal, will give us a dignified life, and it would help us get all this issues and divisions that we create because of a doctrination and because of traditions and old, very obsolete ways of structuring societies. So in this new order of respect, of welcoming, I think the role of soccer, specifically soccer, it's crucial. It's been, you know, it's the biggest tool to create a dialogue. And the results that we see and that we have seen with the organization working in undeveloped communities in Latin America, where violence is such a permanent, it has brought them together, it has given them a self of dignify, and it has actually lifted the curve of poverty into a curve of prosperity and having the opportunity to have a dignified life. And that's, I think, the pursuit of happiness that every human being has as a human right. You know, the liberty, the justice, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think soccer plays that, and that's the game that we want to play from Goleadoras and our organization to this webinar put together by the incredible Generation Amazing and the Qatar Foundation and all you fellows that do incredible work. And I think it also works for us to come together and find ways of collaborating, of bringing that message of inclusion, of respect in a broader spectrum with, you know, the social media in Roma that you have amazing, with the incredible work that you do in education, Sharon, which I'm a fan and I really want to talk about, and how can we bring it together beyond just Canada and the US and bring it to Latin America, and have these people have opportunities and different outlets for education. Education is not just a little box that labels people into feminine, masculine, this is what boys do, this is what Middle Eastern do, this is what Latin looks like. I think this is all these labels that have been taught to us, and from generation to generation, that it's up to us to break a little bit those glass ceiling and have a broader understanding of the diversity of us humans.
Okay, thank you, Eglantina. And I'll make a confession here, and I think this is the first time I've made this public confession. I went to Qatar for the first time 10 years ago, and I was afraid. And when I was on the plane, I was afraid. I didn't know what I was going to find. And here I am now 10 years later, probably having been in Qatar 40 or 50 times in the last decade. I actually feel more at home in Qatar now than I do my own country. I feel much safer. I feel much more comfortable. And the reason that I was in Qatar is because of sport. And so I would fully endorse what you said. And kudos to your daughter, Paul, because I've been through that experience as well. Okay, so according to my clock, and if you've noticed, I keep looking down to the right. I've got my various notes and things out here down to the right. We've got 1 minute left, so that will be 30 minutes past the hour for those of you operating on the same clock as me. So what I'm going to do is to ask one last question. I'm going to ask our panel members to be fairly short and succinct in the way that they answer, but I'm also going to take. There was one question that caught my attention. In the Q&A section, and that was about stakeholders. So I'm going to try and skillfully combine the two things. So the question that I want to ask is, when you're putting together a program in football that promotes social inclusion or addresses social inclusion, what are some of the key things that people should be doing? And in answering that, if you could highlight for me key stakeholders, people and organizations that you think are important in what you do. So whilst you are, I'm gonna let you ponder that for like 5 seconds as I slowly move across to Sharona. So Sharona, key tips for social inclusion, putting programs together, and who are the important stakeholders?
The easy answer for me for that question, that my key stakeholders are always my students, but also our partners. And in everything we do, I think, you know, social inclusion starts at the top, because Fadi said something about, you know, people dropping out if they don't see examples at the top. And in my 10 seconds, I can tell you that I have 50% of people who are looking at my courses are women, and 12% actually show up, because some parents tell me they're afraid that, you know, they want their daughters to have a more inclusive, you know, an inclusive experience. They don't want them to be the only girl in the class, for example. So in summary, you know, I guess your stakeholders are probably the future generations, which is really appropriate for this webinar. And in putting something together, you have to look at the examples that you're setting at the top. It's cliche because it's true.
So you're talking about at the top of the organizations that are running these projects?
You're you know, any I guess leader, whether it's in our case our academic lecturers or our student support, whether it's the executive leadership, whether it's your advisory board. I've got a fantastic global advisory board, and they're diverse in every way, but most importantly, frankly, in the way they think, which is probably the diversity that matters most to me. And so I think it's about setting good examples. Admitting when you don't know something, just, you know, always be a good inclusive person as much as you can, and make sure that the future generations, the ones that you have the best chance of affecting, are the ones that you're focusing on.
Thanks, Sharona. Fadi?
I think I would say there are two types of stakeholders. One, I think the broader ones, other than the beneficiaries, of course, closely with them. You need to understand what is we're trying to achieve. What are the target behaviors you want to see changing? Is it inclusion? Is it cohesion? Is it kind of more confidence? Is it, we need to define upfront what are we working against so that we could design the right solution. So we need to understand the context very well with the beneficiaries, with, if it's the school, the principals, the teachers, the PE teachers, and so on. But the other type of stakeholders is academics. So academics, is very important to work with them because they have a wealth of information. Bringing them to the field, to the real world, is very important. It creates a lot of kind of synergetic opportunity. Within those stakeholders outside, I would say it's important to work earlier on with a group in organizations called the monitoring and evaluation people. So bringing them earlier on to design things that could be tested, rather than wait until the end of the projects, the programs, the initiatives to test. It would be too late to kind of try to test only at the end what happened. You need to create the proper rigorous assessment mechanism and manage the process early on, the entire value chain, from invitation to mobilization to engagement, all the way to kind of working with data, because we thrive on data. And after all, we could be wrong. We think a program could work or not. What actually is the ultimate referee on this is experimentation. What would tell us if something works or not? So working with early on with those stakeholders, whether it's academics, whether it is monitoring, evaluation, to bring in more scientific methods to assess all these beautiful programs, to learn from one another and collaborate.
Thank you, Fadi. Thank you for that. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what Sharona said, I think it's okay sometimes to admit that you're not the expert at something, or you don't know something. So I think, you know, that's why the work that, you know, someone like what Fadi does is incredibly important, because, you know, that's a really, you know, analytical sort of approach to things that maybe football clubs don't have. You know, we are football clubs. I mean, our speciality is in playing football. And I think there's not enough representation, I think, within football. On the pitch there is, but maybe not across boardrooms, maybe not across federations. And I think one thing that I've sort of learned the most from the whole Black Lives Matter movement is the need to listen. The need to listen to other voices and sometimes shut up and let someone else speak. Because you have a platform, maybe we should give it to someone else to use. And I think, combining, other voices in a discussion and then mixing it with the expertise of football and the power of football and the popularity of football, and then a sort of analytic approach that Fadi talks about, that's the perfect thing. But that's listening to other people, not just believing in an arrogant way as a football club because you have millions of followers that you know everything, because we don't. And we need help, and that's why we're on, this webinar today. That's why we partner with Generation Amazing. That's why we try to work with different organizations that can help us achieve the goals that we're all trying to achieve.
I particularly like that point, Paul, about listening. I think there are a lot of people in the world that hear, but they don't listen. And certainly one of the things that I always say to my students is you've got to learn to listen and to really understand what people are telling you. There's something that I've read about recently, that people generally listen now only thinking about what they're going to say as a response. And I make that mistake as well. But the idea to actually just genuinely listen to someone and understand that your opinion could change based on what they say, rather than listening to them basically waiting for your chance to interject again. I say that as I interjected into you. It's okay. I understand completely. It was for purposes of illustration. I know that, but I'm a strong believer. Just step back and listen. Don't interrupt. Don't impose your opinions on the situation. Just step back and listen. Eglantina, to you finally, something short and sharp on how do you make programs work, what's important, and key stakeholders.
Well, I agree to Paul. We're here to also to listen and to get and to learn, and that thing of listening and being present in the moment now, especially with all this pandemic, with the pandemic moment that we're living in the world, to be present. And that's something that I love about soccer, because when you put these kids in the field, they need to run after a ball, and just by the natural game, they're not listening what their parents are telling them to do. They need to quick act and react on their own intuition, and they need to be present. And that's something that you teach them. You form their personalities as a youngster to be able to be present and not just be thinking, oh, what's going to be the next move? Because then you miss the ball, you didn't catch it. Obviously, there are planning of the game and structures, and just like that is the way that we are forming our programs. Because what we're trying to work is with changing the social tissue, or we're working with emotions, we're working with deep social discomposition that has been brought genetically, basically, from generation to generation of what are their opportunities, and we're trying to break those cycles of poverty and cycles of misused opportunities for the youth. And I think what Generation is Amazing is it's doing, it's bringing together the data, the grassroots programs, the unexplicable massive amount of fanatics that a soccer team can lead. Just by 22 players that are going onto the field, they have millions and millions of fanatics dying, willing to give their lives for their team, and gives them that representation. So it's a lot of emotion. So what we're trying to bring it together is to tap into that humanity and kindness and empathy that we all share through the universal language of soccer. So that's a big challenge, but I think it's very exciting to really prove the theory. Are we humans willing to be a better group and society together? Are we willing to be kind and empathetic? Do we actually have a heart, or we're just all based in numbers and datas, and our families are going to be and especially in times like now that the evolution of what we call humanity, our interaction has changed so much. We're not in a panel sitting down as we usually would have been doing in Doha or in New York or even in Paris. But we're all in a Zoom call, having a digital experience. But it's maybe it's a little, or some people will say that's not a human experience, but it is perhaps an evolution of what our experiences are going to be as a humanity. And for us as a small organization, our biggest challenges was to adapt our mission of creating that impact of empowering girls on and off the field in a challenging times like this, that they cannot be on a field, that they're really not playing, that some of their sponsorships in schools are being taken away because they're not playing soccer. So there's not an impact, that they are competing. So the schools are telling them, you're not going to be able to finish your high school. You're going to get off of our program. So we were able to adapt it into a digital platform of these girls creating this conversation and these dialogues and alliances. And I invite you all to follow them and to check it out, Goleadoras, All Stars, as having that opportunity so they can use their voice and they can tackle the social issues and challenges that they face. And even harder and very different of the challenges that we had 10 years ago and that we will have in the next 3 years. What's going to be their economical prospect? How is soccer going to help them? And what's the role of soccer in having such a powerful voice? How is it helping alleviate the issues that we're going to be facing that we're facing now and that we'll be facing within the next years? So, okay. I thank you all for the work that you do and sharing this information because it's very valuable. But I think it's a work that is a question that is for all of us. How are we? What are the stakeholders?
Okay, thank you, Eglantina. Thank you. I'm going to summarize it in just a very personal way. And the first thing I'll say is I was born and brought up in a town where people didn't really go to university. What they did is they worked, but they also kicked a ball in the street. And so my earliest memories and my formative years about talking to people and making friends with people and learning to lose and learning to work in a team and learning to win 35-0. They were the days, those fantastic games of football in the street when you could win 35-0. So I think on the street, I learned a lot about social inclusion and about people being together. So there is something about the power of football. But there's also something about my personal story, which it's just occurred to me as we've gone through the webinar today, is as I mentioned, people in my town really didn't typically go to university. They went to school and then they left and got a job. And so what you've got here today is a group of people who are, a Canadian woman in London and a Venezuelan woman in Miami and it's just incredible. An English guy in France. What I would say to you is that it pays to get a good education because an education is part of the journey. And I think it pays also to put yourself in the position where you can meet different people and you can travel the world because that brings a different perspective. But what I'm trying to say perhaps to some of the people who are here today who are thinking, well, I'm a Lebanese person and I don't live in Los Angeles, or I'm a woman and I face big structural obstacles. No matter what your situation is, I would strongly encourage you, don't give up. There are people around you who will help and support, and there are people out there in the world who are trying to create opportunities for others. Do learn to listen. Do keep an open mind. Do have an open heart. I think it's very human to be scared, but one of the great things about football, one of the great things about travel and education, one of the great things about people like the panelists is, this is an amazing time to be alive, and it's an amazing sport to be involved in. So on that basis, before I go on for too long monologuing, which I said to the speakers beforehand, I do have a tendency to monologue. can I firstly acknowledge there have been some questions in the Q&A section. There is, I've forgotten how they're labelled. Anonymous attendee. Whoever that anonymous attendee is, I actually think that's a great question, and I didn't want to go to it because I thought it would have opened up such big issues. But even the way that we use language and that we communicate with one another is kind of laden with the way in which we see the world, the way in which we conceive of the world. But that was a great question, anonymous attendee, that next time when we meet, whenever that is, we'll address that. But otherwise, what I really want to do is to say, firstly, thank you to the Supreme Committee, to Josso, to Generation Amazing, more specifically to Sharona, to Eglantina, to Fadi, to Paul for being here today. Thanks for everybody for participating, for being involved, for listening, for the questions. And I really sincerely hope that all of us today, we've listened and we've learned. And as we move forwards, we're going to be able to think about things and do things in a different way. So on that note, thanks everyone. So applause to the speakers, applause to the attendees, and we'll see you on the next one now. Thank you. Bye.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
You too.
Stay safe. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.